Yeah. Hey, look, I want to welcome Bill and the traveling gang here, the Chuckleheads and Goober here to the Battle of Wyse Fork, or Wyse's Forks. We're here along the Southwest Creek line, which was a major aspect of the Confederate defenses of Kinston from essentially the summer of '62 all the way in. You're looking at these trenches 159 years later after the war, and this is one of our crown jewels. We have approximately 50 plus acres of this trench line here that is preserved right now as part of the Historic Preservation Group here in Lenoir County and Kinston as part of the Wyse Fork Battlefield. See those white poles in the distance?
Yes.
That's this side and the opposite side of the bridge that goes across Southwest Creek.
Oh, wow.
There's three key bridges along this part of the line. The main road, which we were out on, Highway 70, there's a right before we hung left, there was a bridge right there. You have the second bridge, which is right here, and a third bridge over here by the Southwest Creek Church, which I'll show you because you get a real good feel for just how important the creek was. We look at the width, and the depth. I mean, it's not no ditch. So when you put these kind of earthworks with that kind of sitting with behind that kind of piece of terrain feature with clear fields of fire, you wouldn't have none of these trees here. You'd be able to see the Union forces a good distance away coming down there. So with that said, we're going to move off into the trenches. First battalion had 2 guns. The emplacements are right off there to the left of the railroad track here. This is the Atlantic and North Carolina Railroad. It was completed, I want to say, in the early 1850s. It essentially ran from the port at Morehead City down on the coast to Goldsboro. Goldsboro, North Carolina was a major transportation hub here in eastern North Carolina. You had 3 main railroads, the Atlantic in North Carolina, which linked the coast to Goldsboro. From Goldsboro continuing west was the North Carolina Railroad, which ran out towards Charlotte and Salisbury. Now also, and very important, especially to a guy by the name of Robert E. Lee, was the Wilmington and Weldon Railroad, which ran up from the blockade running port of Wilmington up to Weldon and Garysburg area, then ultimately the Petersburg Road up into towards Richmond, which was very vital to sustaining Lee's army in Northern Virginia. Now, why is this important right here? You know, when we first wrote the book to prepare for Sherman's coming, I wanted to put it in the title of the book, For Want of a Railroad, because what Sherman had done before he ever left Savannah, he put his finger on the map and told his logisticians and chief railroad engineer and commissaries, hey, meet me in Goldsboro mid-March to refit and rearm my army with supplies, because really, don't think of the Bennett place yet in Appomattox. When all this was being formulated down there between Grant and Sherman, Sherman's army of 60,000 is headed to Virginia. Yeah. To link up and put the final knockout blow on Robert E. Lee. But, you know, from here to Savannah is about 450 miles. You're talking about a march in the dead of winter through major rivers, the swampy, low country area of South Carolina. So Sherman knew that when he got here in Goldsboro is like an intermediate objective. Everybody can get fresh uniforms and shoes, and then we move on and continue to Virginia. Now, what's happening here from the federal perspective is, you know, Sherman's army is 60,000 men. It's going to be here for several weeks as it refits and rearms. You know, Sherman's armies are normally known for the foragers, the bummers, you know. Well, you know what? The problem with Sherman's army group, because it really consisted of 2 armies, whenever it stopped, was bad, because it had to constantly be moving, because what the foragers are doing are like a swarm of locusts. So if he's going to be in Goldsboro for a good extended period of time, he knew he couldn't forage around Goldsboro and Wayne County and wherever. So he knew to sustain that army, he needed a railroad link with that kind of logistics. And that's going to come from the port at Morehead City, because when the Confederates finally gave up Wilmington, on February 22nd, they did a daggone good job of making sure the U.S. Army wasn't going to use the Wilmington and Weldon Railroad for a while. That's why this railroad becomes so important, and that's why I say for one of a railroad. So when the federal forces are advancing out of New Bern with Jacob D. Cox on early morning hours of March 2nd, they're coming straight down this railroad. And the problem with the railroad here is mid-war, if you go back towards New Bern's about what, 40 miles as the crow flies?
Yeah, 35 to 40.
Yeah, somewhere like that. So you go back there about good halfway. During the war, the Confederates pulled up about 17 miles of this iron and recycled it for elsewhere. So between Kinston and New Bern is almost like no man's land. A lot of, so when the Federals are coming out of New Bern, advancing towards Kinston, they've got to repair 17 miles of railroad tracks. Okay. Now, they think, Jacob D. Cox and the Federals think, there's nothing but old men and young boys defending Kinston. They have no clue that Joe Johnston had recommended to Braxton Bragg, who commands the Department of North Carolina, hey, we can't let this force coming out of New Bern link up with Sherman's 60,000. It's not going to work. So that's when Robert Hoke's division, which is about 4,500 veteran soldiers from the Army of Northern Virginia, Lee lent Hoke's division to come back down right before the fall of Fort Fisher in December of '64. But they're going to move in here and they're going to occupy some trenches here, which are wonderful. You'll see them in a second. But after the fall of New Bern in 1862, this whole area was fortified. About 13 miles of trenches and earthworks and artillery positions were dug, a 13-mile ring around Kinston, because the threat, when Burnside occupied New Bern, Fort Macon, Roanoke Island in '62, that was the Union stronghold on the coast of North Carolina. But when you're 35, 40 miles from New Bern, that's where your threat's going to come from. So that's why you're going to see some wonderful works here that we the part of Historic Preservation Group here in Lenoir County and Kinston has.
Where are we at on the map?
You're right here. You're right here.
There, okay.
We're standing right here, just to the right of railroad tracks. And you can see the Neuse River is right off in this direction here. And there's Southwest Creek, which is a major terrain feature. It's a branch off the Neuse River. And you can see where the Confederate works are right along this line right here.
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay. Oh, that's it. Okay.
159 years of erosion and everything, but
trees growing.
The cool thing in this whole area has been logged, but he always made sure that this was pink flagged off and no one touched those works. And that's why we're lucky today to have them.
He died about a year and a half ago at the age of 93.
Wow.
Yeah. So we've got, what is this, about 58? This is
57 acres.
This encompasses 57 acres, and
We
then
have
there's
all the earthwork lines. We're out this way about 200 yards that way, out in front where the rifle pits are, all the way back towards, halfway to the mill pond.
So you can see, if you're an attacking force from New Bern, and you think it's nothing but old Ben and young boys here defending Kinston, no, Robert Hoke's division from the Army of Northern Virginia has moved in and is now occupied. Hoke's guys are saying, this is pretty great. These are nice works. Now, who dug these? Impressed labor. Free blacks, enslaved individuals, that's who dug these. Beginning in 1862, and of course the soldiers would put their subtle touches and stuff to it, but this was throughout eastern North Carolina, coastal North Carolina, Fisher, Anderson, Caswell, the defenses around Fayetteville, Goldsboro, a lot of that was all done with impressed labor by the Confederate Engineer Bureau.
As we walk to the artillery trenches, you could see how impressive these trenches are all these years later.
Yeah, immediately following the Battle of New Bern in March of 1862, which was part of General Burnside's expedition here in coastal North Carolina. Of course, the Confederate forces fell back here to Kinston. Kinston's about roughly 35, 40 miles west of New Bern along the Atlantic and North Carolina Railroad. It will become the Confederate stronghold here in the east in case anything comes out of New Bern threat-wise, such as Foster's raid in December of '62, and then Jacob D. Cox in March of '65, who's coming out of New Bern to secure the railroad in Goldsboro for General Sherman, who's coming up from Savannah at the time. But these works here were initiated right after the Battle of New Bern, like I said, in March of '62. Since this is the Confederate stronghold towards the east, these works will make up approximately 12, 13 miles of trenches that were part of the main Confederate defensive line. Immediately to my rear is Southwest Creek, which meanders for several miles. It empties out into the Neuse River, which is a mile or two there back towards my right here. So the Southwest Creek off here, these trenches guarding the railroad, as we pointed out earlier, you can see this is a major obstacle if you're an attacking force coming out of New Bern. There would have been none of these trees here. There's been clear fields of fire. There are, we know of rifle pits that exist out there where the Confederate skirmishers would have been kicked forward as early warning. Those rifle pits still exist. You fall back to this. Artillery located in this general area. Smaller positions down there more for the infantry. This is a wonderful preserved part of Civil War history here in eastern North Carolina that we're hoping to preserve here at Wyse Fork Battlefield. Now, who built these? Who constructed these? Impressed labor, free blacks. Sure, the soldiers came in and put their fine tuning to it, but the heavy lifting and the back-breaking work was all done by impressed labor, the Confederate Engineer Bureau. And it's not just here in Kinston, Fayetteville, Goldsboro, and you see it down in the lower Cape Fear defenses around Wilmington and such. Impressed labor doing that as well.
Thank you.
Works. The rest of those two divisions are about a good mile and a half back. So they're sticking out like a sore thumb. And General Hoke picks up on that. Yeah. And General Hoke is going to make the recommendation at Bragg's Council of War, hey, let D.H. Hill, who's coming in from Smithfield, which is about 25 miles, about 40 some miles back on the railroad, with the elements of the Army of Tennessee. These are the guys who just fought at Franklin and Nashville, what's left of them. Right. They've made it here to the Carolinas, and D.H. Hill will bring forward those elements. And Hoke recommends that let D.H. Hill come into these trenches here and relieve my soldiers, and I'll take my brigades through the night. And one of the regimental commanders in Hoke's division was Colonel John Nethercutt, who's a local boy. So he knew the roads and the back alleys and everything else. So during the night, Nethercutt will guide Hoke's division around. And our next stop, I'm going to show you where Hoke and D.H. Hill literally capture an entire Federal brigade. Over 900 were captured in less than 40 minutes.
Wow.
And, well, part of that was, upon hearing the sounds of the guns from Hoke initiating the attack, all those footbridges that D.H. Hill's guys have been building during the night, along with the North Carolina Junior Reserves, will come across Southwest Creek. And I'm going to show you Southwest Creek so you get a good idea of what it looks like here in a second. The other thing I didn't mention was bring up the Junior Reserves. I mentioned to you how the Federals thought it was nothing but old men and young boys here. Well, the young boys were the North Carolina Junior Reserves. Okay. The Confederate Conscription Act in spring of '64 authorized the raising of 16 and 17-year-old boys to form these regiments. Now, they were designed so the normal line regiments do not have to guard a railroad bridge up at Weldon, right. Or guard prisoners over at Salisbury or whatever. Right. So you got these young boys, and then you also had the senior reserves as well. Let them do those rear echelon kind of duties. That way it frees up the young boys, the 20, 25-year-old fighters. That way that regiment can go back up to the Army in Northern Virginia. And this will be, the Battle of Wyse Forks will be for a lot of these young boys. And some of them are not, by law, 16, 17. We know some of them are only 14 to 15 years old. For the vast majority of these boys, this will be their first time seeing the elephant, as Civil War veterans would say, first time in combat, seeing the elephant.
I have to ask, my viewers may ask you, what is seeing the elephant?
That's to a Civil War soldier, combat experience. So that's the first time you experience combat. It's the first time someone's shooting at you.
Well, Mr. Dennis, what's this monument here?
So Goober, let me tell you a little bit about this monument. There was an older gentleman here who was a descendant of John Jackson, who was the first civilian who the Federal Army came into contact with when the Confederates had retreated from this battlefield. His grandson, Mr. Jack Voss, over the course of his lifetime, he was 93, I think, when he passed a year or two ago. He would always come in here when they would cruise this timber in this beautiful place. He would come in and he would put flags up along this earthwork line, and he would tell those cruisers, whatever you do, don't touch those mounds. So he spent his lifetime preserving this, and he got that from his grandfather, John Jackson, and the family, Roland Voss, his father, the whole family, all the way back almost to the Revolution. They owned this property. It was close to the river. It was a critical place, and they realized the historic significance. And so they, in 2007, they, along with the Battlefield Trust, the American Battlefield Protection Program, and the Historic Preservation Group now owns 57 acres of land along these beautiful earthwork lines for over a mile here. And so it's preserved, one of the most beautiful spots on the battlefield. And do you have any other questions?
There's what, 328 significant battlefields out of the 10,000?
Yeah, Goober, there's 384 significant battlefields. And one of the gentlemen walking with me today said, you know what, he thought he knew a whole lot about the Civil War, but he had never really heard of the Battle of Wyse Fork. Well, it was determined by a panel put together by Congress back in the early 2000s that there were 384 nationally significant battlefields in the United States out of 10,500 conflicts. And Wyse Fork is one of those 384. What do you think about that?
Wow. Well, anything else you'd like to say, Mr. Dennis, before we move on?
Nope.
All right. And
No
I would
more
like
questions.
to say thank you for your sense of humor dealing with Goober the Traveling Bear.
He was great.
Well,
Bill, as Wade Sokolosky here, as a member of the Save Wyse Fork Battlefield Commission, which is a subordinate organization underneath the Historic Preservation Group here in Lenore County and Kinston, I want to say thank you for what you're doing here to help in regards to small sites, small organizations such as ourselves, as we try to preserve until about 10 years ago, almost forgotten battle here in eastern North Carolina that arguably is the second largest land battle fought here during the Civil War in the state of North Carolina, and was so important to Sherman and this railroad that he would let her say all this was about to prepare for my coming. But for example, the check you're going to give us today for $300, something like this, a brigade level marker on a nice aluminum stand. Now of course this is just a mock-up here, but something weatherproof along the trail, along the trenches, out on the battlefield, both a blue and a gray depending on what kind of brigade. This is an example of one over in Bentonville that we recently just put out, but we obviously want to do the same thing. This is about $250, one brigade with that nice stand. So you can see, do the math, how important just a simple little check for $300, Bill. Goober just bought one of these.
all right.
The other thing, it could be something simple as like right here when you pull up. You want a nice sign that says trenches this way. Well, this costs money. This paint costs money. The 4x4 posts, we're going to put this to the ground. That's where the money that you're raising for small sites like us, small, battlefields like this, that we're not the Gettysburgs and the Chickamaugas of the world and stuff, okay? But you know what? It's one thing to preserve this land, but then you got to interpret it, okay? You need kiosks, parking areas, brigade level markers, the interpretive, like Civil War Trail interpretive panels. Those things can cost anywhere from $1,300 to $1,500 per panel. I mean, Dennis and I could sit here all day and figure out where we need about a dozen of them here. So what you're doing is so important, and I know I speak for the Save Wyse Fork Battlefield group. Thank you so much for what you're doing.
Well, thank you very much.
To my rear, Bill, is Southwest Creek, which meanders down to the Neuse River to my left, and then back towards the trenches that we just came from. You can see a combination of this major terrain feature, which is good 6-7 feet deep in the middle, in combination with the trenches, breastworks, engineering efforts that the Confederates put into defending Kinston. This part of the line was a very tough nut to crack if you're an attacking force coming out of Newbern.
On the way here, this creek right here, you see it's very straight. Well, this creek meanders quite a bit through these low grounds. Right down here about a quarter mile, there is a hairpin turn that probably turns about 140 degrees. It comes back on itself and goes back towards the river that way. And over towards the mill pond, that would be like what you might want to call Oxbow Lakes. It's like where it tried to make another creek. And so you're down in that swamp, and it's like, it's not just one straight line creek, it's meandering. And like I say, there's some hairpin turns, very sharp turns, because where you might have a little sandbar on the inside of the curve, and then it's very steep on the other edge. That's the deepest edge. But like Wade said, very formidable, and as soon as you cross, you've got the major earthworks.
Well, can I ask you a question,
Sure.
Mr. Dennis? You had mentioned about when you were a young boy, you fell in this creek. Can you tell me what it would have been like for a Union soldier to have to cross this creek and then attack the entrenchments?
Yep, right up in the hairpin curve that I was describing a while ago, Goober, down here about a quarter mile, there's a little Boy Scout hut, a little A-frame scout hut. And we were barbecuing a pig that day. And I was there by myself, and you know, back in the day, I always loved to fish, so I'm fishing with my little fishing pole, and there's one girl down there. She comes up later on, and while I was fishing, I got too close to the edge of that bank. See how steep it is? And my feet slipped. Fishing pole went that way, and I went down into the creek. And right on the very edge, I was up to my neck. And I'm about 6'2" almost. I was up to my neck, and there's that steep bank. Goober, look. And I couldn't get out. That girl had to pull me out of the water. And obviously, I think I hung around a little while because I was cooking the pig, but when some reinforcements came in, I went home and put on another set of clothes because I was muddy and wet.
So a Union soldier with his full equipment and his musket, it would be a tough job to get across that, correct?
Not only was it tough, Goober, he wouldn't even attempt that. He was smarter than that. He stayed back on this side because there was some bad guys on the other side, and he didn't want none of it. So they all stayed on this side. None of them came across till a few days after the battle was over. What do you think about that?
Thank you very much.
The Goober. In 1964, I was 11 years old, and my father built that house right in the background here, this brick house. I used to find artifacts as a little kid from this battlefield, and I started collecting them, and I got an interest in it, Goober. And over the course of the last 60 years, I have recovered archaeologically on this battlefield and documented over 15,000 artifacts from this battlefield. What do you think about that, buddy?
That's amazing, Mr. Dennis.
Oh, amazing. Nice. Thank you.
What
Got
do
any
we
other questions?
I've just got to ask, we're standing in front of sign. Was this sign here when you were here?
That sign in 1964 was not there. A good friend of mine, Donnie Taylor, who was a site manager at Bentonville, a great preservationist and archaeologist back in the day, lived right down the road. We grew up together. He was about 4 years older than I was. And Donnie created, I believe, the narrative for this sign that sits here. It was probably put here back in the, I'm guessing, the 70s. And it's taken care of by our CSS Ram News Camp 1427. One of the volunteers and his son there come here and keep this place cleaned up and spruced up. They do it every few months, all during the course of the year. So this has been here for quite a long time.
Thank you.
What we call map marker 5.
The monument we're looking at here was placed in honor of the recognition of Major General Robert Hoke's division, General Hoke being a North Carolinian, on the morning of March 8th, in cooperation with Major General Daniel Harvey Hill and those elements from the Army of Tennessee. Between those two, Hoke's division and the Army of Tennessee, well over 900 United States Army soldiers were captured just a short distance from here. And shortly after their capture, the overall senior commander here, General Braxton Bragg, rode up to General Hoke and congratulated him. And to mark that spot, this monument was later put in there. Matter of fact, there's some great pictures in the state archives in Raleigh that shows when this monument was dedicated, and actually General Hoke's grandsons or grandchildren are in the picture as well. Now, this is not the original location. That's back towards Kinston, because later on, I want to say in the 1970s, Dennis, Highway 70 was widened to a dual-lane highway. Well, when they did that, we had to move the monument. So now this is its second location. Well, right now, as currently Highway 70 here in your background, Bill, will now become Interstate 42. Chances are this monument, this piece here, Goober, will once again have to be moved elsewhere or pushed back. So it will be moved for a second time here in the near distant future. So,
Thank you. Okay.
yeah. We are approximately right here on the map. What you see, the Dover Road, is the modern day Highway 70. To my left, off into distance right there, you can see how the ground starts to go down. That's Southwest Creek. That is the third bridge that I talked about. 3 key bridges across Southwest Creek. We just came from Southwest Creek Church. We were in the trenches by the railroad bridge, and now we're here. 3 bridges, key to the Confederate defensive line here along Southwest Creek. If the Federals are able to secure just one of these bridges and get enough infantry across, you're quickly going to turn the Confederates out of their position. They're going to fall back several miles to Kinston. Well, there's the Sam Howard House where I pointed out to you earlier this morning across the bridge. That is the home where Braxton Bragg will have his council of war, and it's on the evening of March 7th that General Hoke recommends that we attack this lone brigade here. Remember how I talked about earlier, 2 divisions came up on this area here, Palmer and Carter's. The 1st Division of the 23rd Corps, Ruger's division, is about 10 miles back, helping cut railroad ties for that 17 miles of dead space on the railroad. But this is about a mile, a little over a mile, between where Upham's brigade was located at, right in this area, right here, back to the modern day community of Wyse Fork. So you can see when General Hoke, it's like a sore thumb. It's sticking out. It's ripe for the taking. And this very thin skirmish line here between Upham's brigade in the south and Harlan's brigade in the north, they're having to pull infantry out because this is more than a mile. And this skirmish line is really the only connecting force between these 2 brigades that are woefully very poor tactical setup right here. And the Federals think the next morning, you know what, we're just going to go across and take one of these bridges. And like I said, During the night, they hear the chopping of the wood over there. And it's not the Confederates. They misinterpreted that as thinking the Confederates were digging in. No, the Confederates were constructing footbridges to get across that creek. And what Hoke recommended, pull his guys out of the line, and Colonel Nethercutt will take them all this direction here, and they're going to come around this direction here. And D.H. Hill and the Army of Tennessee, along with the Junior Reserves, will occupy the space now. And they're going to keep up the artillery fire and occasional small arms fire to give the impression that we're still here, with no clue that Robert Hoke's division of 4,000 plus through the night is now moving around this area right here. And if you notice on the map, right here in the southwest corner down here, there's a detachment of Union cavalry from the 12th New York and one company from the 23rd New York. They're guarding the far left over here. And early in the morning of March 8th, word got to the senior commanders up here, hey, there's a large body of rebels moving off in that direction. And eventually it makes it to General Cox, all the way back on the railroad. And Cox will dismiss it because, one, it's coming through, can you trust that civilian source? Okay. Oh, by the way, I have the traditional means, the traditional fighting force to prevent from us being surprised. The cavalry's out on our flank guarding it. Well, the trouble is, on March 8th, there's about 60 individuals from those 2 or 3 companies of New York cavalry that were captured on March 8th. And only one lieutenant was killed. No one was wounded. So you got to ask yourself a question. How does a guy who makes a living on a horse get captured by an infantryman who makes a living walking? One clue comes from a letter a junior reserve, them young boys back in these trenches, after the battle, he wrote his mom, is like, those Yankees were almost like drunk. They got into some apple brandy or something. Well, obviously they pulled a big one over here during the night of March 7th. In the morning of March 8th, all of a sudden, gentlemen, and eventually either a free black or an enslaved individual came up to Colonel Bartholomew from the 27th Massachusetts, who controlled this part of the battlefield, and says, Colonel, you're about to be outflanked. And Bartholomew was only able to reorientate his regiment back to this direction and get part of his skirmish line moving off to the left there. You see the low ground. And Bartholomew talks about how all of a sudden, up out of that low ground, here comes this wall of gray. And Hoke's division had literally come right up upon them. Now, the 15th Connecticut and 27th Massachusetts are typically the only 2 regiments that historians have credited for being part of Upham's brigade, and that's incorrect. Both of these regiments, because Eastern North Carolina was not a priority in the spring of '64 when Grant launched the Overland Campaign. Okay, the bloody battles of Cold Harbor and Spotsylvania stuff, those meat grinders, and all the replacements, all the reserves. Why did Eastern North Carolina only have 30 wagons in New Bern? Why? Because the Quartermaster Department had stripped this whole area of all its wagons and sent to the Army of the Potomac. So this was a low priority backwater region for the United States military, United States Army. Then all of a sudden, boom, here comes this guy Sherman's going to start showing up, okay? Now all of a sudden, it is a priority. And so these 2 regiments, the 27th Massachusetts and 15th Connecticut, for example, the 27th, in March of 1865 was barely 200 guys. That's a regiment. That's doctrine. There's only 2 companies, really, okay? So they had what was called provisional soldiers. Part of the force coming out of New Bern was provisional soldiers going to Sherman's army. They were either replacement soldiers, brand new buck privates, Okay, the recruiter just got them fresh off the boat of Ellis Island, can't even speak a lick of English, and all of a sudden now you're in the Army. And oh, by the way, some of these young privates that were raw recruits heading to Sherman's Army could not even speak English on the morning of March 8th, and now they're in a major battle. Another part of the provisionals were part of Sherman's veterans who were going back. These guys had re-enlisted after the Atlanta campaign and were allowed to go back to Iowa, Illinois, Wisconsin, wherever for 30, 45 days, and now they're trying to catch up to Sherman's Army, which, oh, by the way, had moved to Atlanta to Savannah. So now they're coming across from New Bern, or they were wounded during the Atlanta campaign or were too sick to leave with the Army when it departed Savannah area, and now they're trying to play catch up. So you had these provisional soldiers. So some of them, because of they didn't really come as an organic unit, where you had enough lieutenants and sergeants and captains, you may see these provisional battalions listed on the maps here fighting. Under the Union Order of Battle, you'll see 1st Provisional Battalion. Well, it's made up of a mixture of all kinds of soldiers from Illinois, Iowa, wherever, and they just happen to have enough senior captains or a major and sergeants to form at least a battalion. Then some of these provisional soldiers, because they didn't have enough leadership, they were literally just farmed out and assigned to the 27th Massachusetts and 15th Connecticut. So when you say on morning of March 8th, the 5th soldiers from Massachusetts and Connecticut were captured here, you're wrong. You've got soldiers from Illinois, Iowa, Indiana, Michigan, Wisconsin that were in these ranks of the 15th Connecticut and 27th Massachusetts. So it's really a whole lot of states that should be honored here, not just Connecticut and Massachusetts. But this whole thing is over in less than 30 minutes. Bartholomew goes down. Across the street, Lieutenant Colonel Tolis in the 15th Connecticut, that was their headquarters at the Cobb House. And Bill, if you fling around here, the Cobb House is the Union headquarters up here for a while. But after the disaster here, and after Robert Hoke had captured these, and the Army of Tennessee and D.H. Hill and the Junior Reserves had come across the creek, and they bagged about 300 of these. All right, the Cobb House behind me becomes a Confederate field hospital. So it's gone from being a Union headquarters to a Confederate field hospital until all the wounded are policed up and got back to the railhead or into temporary hospitals back towards Kinston. Now what's interesting about this house is upstairs in the attic, and to the left and right of the chimneys that go up on each side of the house, there's small windows. And the side here that faces to the west, if you go up there, you look through that window, you can see the Confederate lines there. So if you were a soldier here in March of 1865, a Federal soldier from Upham's brigade, if you got up in that attic, you could literally see the Confederate artillery emplacements and infantry along Southwest Creek. And just as soldiers will be soldiers, they're bored at times, and even up there in that plaster wall today, there are the handwritten names of soldiers that were bored and did soldier stuff, signed little graffiti upstairs inside the Cobb House, still exists today.
Wow, thank you.
Yep.
Mr. Skip here, and what do you have, sir?
Well, I just wanted to share this piece of artwork by Mason Jones. This is the Cobb House shortly after the battle that Dennis was just talking about. And as you can see, there's a number of fallen Federal soldiers. In the reality of the battle, there was a Captain Bassett of the 15th Connecticut who, after he was passed away, his remains were taken out and buried. And to this day, they have not found his remains. They have not been moved to the New Bern Cemetery, nor have they been returned to Connecticut. So we believe that there is solid evidence that his remains still are on the battlefield to this day.
Wow. Well, thank you. Let me get another close-up.
Okay.
All right. Well, thank you for that.
Okay.
Well, we are donating $300 to the Wyse Fork Battlefield Commission. Is that correct? We have Goober the Traveling Bear. We have Mr. Skip, Mr. Wade, and Mr. Dennis. And I hope you out there might consider sending a little bit of cash to help save this beautiful battlefield. Do you guys have anything you'd like to say?
Yeah, I do. Goober, do you know this nice gentleman Bill over here?
Yeah!
Tell him thank you so much for this donation. It'll go a long way towards helping us. Thank you, Bill.
Mr. Wade, Mr. Skip?
No, once again, Bill, thanks for everything you've done for us. And folks, just take a look at the address that Bill will post up online on how to donate to further our cause here and what we're trying to do to not just save the battlefield. Well, hopefully we're going to transition from being Save Wyse Fork to being the Friends of Wyse Fork Battlefield here in the near distant future. And as friends, we definitely need help when it comes to trying to interpret this.
And Mr. Skip?
Yes, I'd like to thank Goober, and I'd like to thank you. Goober, thank you very much for all your assistance on this. Also, I'd like to thank all the efforts for the Wyse Fork Battlefield board game that's becoming on board, which will give people globally, whoever buys the game, a chance to fight the battle in a board game fashion. So thank you very much, and we greatly appreciate all the viewers who look on to the video. Thank you.
Thank you.
And thank you, Goober.
Thank you. Wade, where are we at now?
We are on the far left of the Union line, following the disaster in the morning of March 8th up by the Cobb House with the capture of nearly everyone in the Upham's brigade. Those survivors fell back, as well as the other divisions, all consolidated in this lazy looking L-shaped line that runs for a couple miles here. And if you look off in the distance, you can see it. You know, we don't have Little Round Top here in eastern North Carolina, but you can see where that is the high ground, and you can see where that is that anchors the left flank of the Union line. At the time of the battle, there's two forks in the road that are located up in this general area here. This is the extreme southern end or left flank of Jacob D. Cox's. You see where Ruger's 1st Division of the 23rd Corps quickly came up. They dropped the axes and spades, and now they occupy the center line here. And on the morning of March 10th, General Bragg, who is aware probably a good day's march out is the other two divisions from the 23rd Corps, the 2nd and 3rd, under the command of Darius Couch, who departed Wilmington on March 6th. They're now within about a day's march of arriving here. And Bragg knows, hey, if we're going to do this, if we're going to defeat or turn back this force to New Bern, we got to do it now, because once Darius Couch arrives with 2 additional divisions, there's nothing we can really do. So on the morning of March 10th, Hoke's division once again makes that flanking move through the night and will attack essentially, excuse me, south to north, coming out of the wood line here to my left, with 2 brigades up, 2 brigades back. You have General Kirkland's Tar Heels Brigade up here on the right. Across this little meandering ditch, low area there on the other side is Colonel Zachary in charge of Colquitt's Georgia Brigade. And then you have 2 remaining brigades from Hoke's division, Haygood's South Carolinian, which honestly has more North Carolina Red Infantry, former heavy artillerymen in the brigade now. There's more of them than is South Carolinians. And then also Klingman's brigade under the command of Colonel Devan from the 61st North Carolina. So 2 brigades up, 2 brigades back. Hoke will go forward thinking that he is hitting essentially the left flank. He's hitting the end of the line, the bottom of the L, but he does not realize that General Cox, because he has interior lines, shifted McQuiston's brigade of soldiers from Indiana and Ohio to extend that line further back towards New Bern on the Dover Road. So when Hoke's 2 brigades come forward and they're thinking they're hitting the end of the line, no, they're not. The line goes farther that way. So now instead of, now they're taking flanking fire into their right flank and such. And then here, 4 companies under Major Irvin Robbins from the 123rd Indiana will come forward and essentially attack the right flank of Kirkland's brigade. Now, these are 4 companies that hit this brigade in the right flank. The other aspect of this is, because of the nature of the ground, you can see it, as you went forward, any kind of artillery fire that the Union had concentrated up there, or even a small arms fire, is going over your head. But you can see eventually you're going to start, I can see your head, I can see your chest, I can see your waist, I can see your knees. So as you get farther to the north, now all of a sudden those attacking brigades, especially Colquitt's, they went forward and it quickly came back. And it left Kirkland's brigade of Tar Heels up here somewhat isolated. Now Colonel Nethercutt, according to some accounts, will get within about 50 to 60 yards on horseback of those Union lines. Now there's at least 12 guns that are concentrated and massed in this area, along with a wall of blue infantry with small arms fire. But it gets to the point, Kirkland's guys get so close, they start hugging the earth. They're in a bad spot. If they stand up and turn around, they're going to get hit in the back. And then all of a sudden, Major Erwin Robbins comes from that direction over there and slams into their right flank. The only thing that really saves Kirkland's brigade here is that Cox thought this was the diversionary attack. He thought the main attack from Bragg was going to happen in the center, where he weakened himself by the Army of the Tennessee. Now the Army of Tennessee will come forward and attack. This is their second to the last grand charge of the Army of Tennessee, the last one occurring at Bentonville a little bit more than a week later. But the only reason the Army of Tennessee comes out of those trenches and attacks is to relieve pressure off Kirkland. And by doing so, and Cox calls off the dogs with Erwin Robbins, says back off. It allows Hoke to get his division out of this nasty spot, i.e. Kirkland's brigade. But eventually Bragg will determine that he simply does not have enough infantry from the Army of Tennessee. Cox has interior lines. This is a very strong position because Cox can shift. Look at the arrows. I mean, he can move units, is what we call interior lines, wherever he thinks the threat is. And when we talk about threat, this is the threat today. What you're seeing right there, gentlemen, is the proposed interchange for I-42. Now we've gone through about a couple iterations, more like 8 or 9 iterations over the last 2 years of the North Carolina DOT and the other consulting parties. And what we've come to right now that we're currently looking at is this interchange that would plop right here. Bill, actually that picture you put, the update on how much money is raised, that is the picture of the interchange plop down on top of this ground here from Google Earth. Right now the proposal is to move it 0.3 miles back towards the east, towards New Bern, and shrink it. Your typical interstate interchange is around 50 plus acres. This one's only going to be about 30 some acres, and oh, by the way, they're going to move it back towards the east about 0.3 miles. So it's essentially, it's going to put it, you're still going to be in the rear area of Cox's rear area, but the great thing is, we now, where this main event happened on March 10th, we will preserve a core piece of the battlefield, the left flank of of Cox's line here at Wyse Fork, and then also Hoke's attack. And it's there's about 55 acres right here that Dennis has identified as a group here, we're asking to be preserved. And by doing those 55 acres, you're preserving this view we have right now. You're going to be able, you're standing both from the attacking position from the Confederates as well as the defending position from the Federals. If you go over there and look back down this way, you get eyeballs from both sides.
Thank you. Where are we at now, Mr. Wade?
We're roughly in the general area right around in here on the Federal line from the afternoon of March 8th through several days after the battle. On March 9th, Hoke will, under Bragg's orders, will attempt to turn the right flank of the Union line, but by that time, like I said, General Cox is game on in regards to what Bragg is trying to do. Cox assumes this defensive position here. He's got interior lines. He's waiting for the arrival of Darius Couch. So when Hoke tries to make this attempted attack on the afternoon of March 9th, it's really come forward. I see entrenched infantry, I see artillery. I no longer have the element of surprise nor mass like I had on the morning of March 8th. So he quickly turns back around. And on the morning of evening of March 9th, Bragg will make the suggestion for Hoke to do the attack where we just came from. And I talked that piece already. Like I said, to relieve the pressure off Hoke's attack from south to north, and where Irwin Robbins from the 123rd had come forward and hit him in the right flank with just 4 companies. To relieve that pressure, elements from S.D. Lee's Corps and A.P. Stewart's Corps, the Army of Tennessee, will attack in this direction towards us against the federal line here. But like I said, you can see here's the interior lines. The 19th New Jersey's moved down from the north, and you can see how they're shifting forces. The 2nd Provisional Battalion, that's the provisionals, the PVs we talked about earlier in one of the videos at the Cobb House. But the Army of Tennessee simply does not have the numbers when it comes forward. The accounts from Quarles Brigade, they talk about Captain Joe Love, who commanded the 48th Tennessee. He talks about how he's trying to extend to the right just to touch the road. But you can see as they go forward, they're getting farther and farther away. This proves too inviting for several regiments over here, and now they will start to come out and hit them in the flank. And by the afternoon of March 10th, Bragg will call off the Army of Tennessee attack here, and they'll begin to fall back. As we said before, that's it for the Battle of Wyse Fork. Bragg will give the order for all these forces to fall back towards Kinston and Goldsboro, and ultimately to Smithfield. As I think Skip mentioned in one of the videos about Remember Franklin, all that action's happening right off in this area here because it's Featherston's Mississippi Brigade. If you look, I think they lost 5 out of the 6 regimental colors was captured. So this is like, Mark and I title it in the book, So We Meet Again, because this is actually 2 Western Theater units right now, Orr's group, the various regiments from Ruger's guys from the 23rd Corps. They all met at Franklin and ultimately Nashville. But what's significant about that is that although Bragg gives up the battlefield on March 10th, because they're capturing soldiers from Hoke's division, they're like, okay, we knew you were in Wilmington, Fort Fisher area. It's understandable you're in this part of North Carolina. But now we're capturing soldiers from S.D. Lee's Corps. We're capturing soldiers from A.P. Stewart's Corps. And they're like, whoa, we just were in this dance with you all in Tennessee around Nashville and Franklin towards the end of the year, and now you're here in eastern North Carolina. So there's some scratching of the heads back here between Cox and his boss, Major General Schofield. And the point is Johnston concentrating the entire Confederate force here at Kinston? Because we've captured prisoners from various units. And like we said, some of them were in Mississippi, in Tupelo, Mississippi at the beginning of January, and now they're here in eastern North Carolina. So it does, Cox will sit and wait for several days as Darius the Couch approaches and comes in here with 2 more divisions, and it's several days before the Federals will move towards the town of Kinston. And actually by then General Hoke has moved on. He actually left Colquitt's Georgians Brigade as a rear guard action along with a couple of North Carolina regiments. But that essentially ends the Battle of Wyse Fork.
I have to ask the question, in the board game that's coming out, we have the CSS Noose.
Okay.
Can you mention our CSS Noose?
Yeah, it was in the evening of, when Bragg gives the order to essentially give up the battlefield and fall back towards Kinston, police up all your wounded, get them on the railroad. We're heading now to Smithfield. Bragg orders the Noose will from the vicinity of where we started out at Southwest Creek this morning, through later times, several of the shells that were fired, really the only time the Noose ever fires are guns in anger, those shells are found right there in the vicinity of Southwest Creek. And what Bragg ordered the noose to do was essentially cover that withdrawal. Because although the infantry was still hanging out here for several days, the 12th New York Cavalry, being pesky cavalry, had went forward west, and the noose was picking up on some of them along the banks of the noose, etc., like that. So that's the only time, and right after that, she scuttled, and the rest is history. And I'll let Matt tell that story.
All right, thank you.
One of the things that we want to preserve this section of the battlefield, Goober, when you look out, that is the equivalent of Wyse Fork Battlefield's Pickett's charge comparison, Kirkland's charge. If you look at the slope of the land, the Confederates attacked without artillery or cavalry support on the rise there. Besides the line of Federals, there were 18 field pieces raining down shot and shell on the Confederates. So when I visit this battlefield, I always pause on this site to think about this is our Pickett's charge for this battlefield. It has the same emotion, the same charge, and when you're here at twilight, it has that same ethereal feel.
Well, thank you, sir. Well, Bill Molyneux here with Goober the Traveling Bear and Bill's History World. I really need to say thank you to Mr. Skip, Mr. Wade, and Mr. Dennis for this incredible tour today. And please help the Wyse Fork, save the Wyse Fork Battlefield Commission. And stay safe, be kind, and be courteous, everyone. And thank you again for watching my channel. Well,
Bill, as Wade Sokolosky here, as a member of the Save Wyse Fork Battlefield Commission, which is a subordinate organization underneath the Historic Preservation Group here in Lenore County in Kinston, I want to say thank you for what you're doing here to help in regards to small sites, small organizations such as ourselves, as we try to preserve until about 10 years ago, almost forgotten battle here in eastern North Carolina that arguably is the second largest land battle fought here during the Civil War in the state of North Carolina, and was so important to Sherman and this railroad that he would let her say all this was about to prepare for my coming. But for example, the check you're going to give us today for $300, something like this, a brigade level marker on a nice aluminum stand. Now of course this is just a mock-up here, but something weatherproof along the trail, along the trenches, out on the battlefield, both a blue and a gray depending on what kind of brigade. This is an example of one over in Bentonville that we recently just put out, but we obviously want to do the same thing. This is about $250, one brigade with that nice stand. So you can see, do the math, how important just a simple little check for $300, Bill. Goober just bought one of these.
All right.
The other thing, it could be something simple as like right here when you pull up. You want a nice sign that says trenches this way. Well, this costs money. This paint costs money. The 4x4 posts, we're going to put this to the ground. That's where the money that you're raising for small sites like us, small, battlefields like us, that we're not the Gettysburgs and the Chickamaugas of the world and stuff, okay? But you know what? It's one thing to preserve this land, but then you got to interpret it, okay? You need kiosks, parking areas, brigade level markers, the interpretive, like Civil War Trail interpretive panels. Those things can cost anywhere from $1,300 to $1,500 per panel. I mean, Dennis and I could sit here all day and figure out where we need about a dozen of them here. So what you're doing is so important, and I know I speak for the Save Wyse Fork Battlefield Group. Thank you so much for what you're doing.
Well, thank you very much. Well, we are donating $300 to the Wyse Fork, Save Wyse Fork Battlefield Commission. Is that correct? We have Goober the Traveling Bear. We have Mr. Skip, Mr. Wade, and Mr. Dennis. And I hope you out there might consider sending a little bit of cash to help save this beautiful battlefield. Do you guys have anything you'd like to say?
Yeah, I do. Goober, do you know this nice gentleman Bill over here?
Yeah!
Tell him thank you so much for this donation. It'll go a long way towards helping us. Thank you, Bill.
Mr. Wade, Mr. Skip.
No, once again, Bill, thanks for everything you've done for us. And folks, just take a look at the address that Bill will post up online on how to donate to further our cause here and what we're trying to do to not just save the battlefield. Well, hopefully we're going to transition from being Save Wyse Fork to being the Friends of Wyse Fork Battlefield here in the near distant future. And as friends, we definitely need help when it comes to trying to interpret this.
And Mr. Skip?
Yes, I'd like to thank Goober, and I'd like to thank you. Goober, thank you very much for all your assistance on this. Also, I'd like to thank all the efforts for the Wyse Fork Battlefield board game that's becoming on board, which will give people globally, whoever buys the game, a chance to fight the battle in a board game fashion. So thank you very much, and we greatly appreciate all the viewers who look on to the video. Thank you.
Thank you.
And thank you, Goober.
Thank you.